welcome to episode 172 the Power Score LSAT podcast. This is John Dinning in Los Angeles.
And this is Dave Kaloran in Napa Valley.
Dave, my man, we are through another test week. How's it going?
It's going good, although I'm recording this podcast instead of watching the Vikings-Bears game, so I'm a little irritated.
Can you tell the truth to the people listening? Are you doing both?
I was for a while, but it's just started, and so I was swearing a lot, and now I've paused it.
All right.
So I have hopes, but not expectations. We'll see how it turns out.
Yeah, if anyone listening to this hears Dave occasionally curse for no reason, it's because he's turned the game back on, and the Vikings are being the Vikings.
It's tough, man. Road game to start the season, Monday Night Football, rookie quarterback. I don't love this scenario.
Oh, yeah.
But
it is Monday Night Football. We're doing this instead. And we're doing it on a Monday, a little earlier than expected. We usually record these test recaps on Tuesdays to get out on Wednesdays. We're doing this one day ahead of time, and I take a certain degree of responsibility. Blame was the word I almost used, because I'm hopping on an airplane tomorrow to come up sort of in your direction, a little past your direction. I'm going to Portland to kind of party around for the better part of a week. So here we are. People get this a day early. You miss Monday Night Football. It's all my fault. What are you drinking?
First off, are you going to go to the Willamette Valley? Is that like your whole plan?
Buddy, I'm following this girl around. I go where she takes me. I do what she says.
There's no reason for me to talk about Oregon, wine country and around Portland then.
Talk to her.
What am I drinking?
You tell her. I don't know.
We'll jump this entirely, away from that. I am in, of course, homage to the Vikings tonight. I am drinking a Summit Brewery, which is basically a Minnesota-Minneapolis brewery, a Saga Hazy IPA. They're really well known for IPAs, and my wife likes IPAs a lot, so we have some around.
Nice. Well, an homage on my end to a premature recording, which is I didn't really plan to have a drink today, but since we are, I scrounged around a fridge and I found a straight Pacifico, so I've got a beer. I thought we were going to do this tomorrow, so I would have stocked something and done this a little bit in the morning, drank in the morning, jumped on a plane, but here we are. So I've got a beer, you've got a beer, we're drinking beer. There we go.
Excellent. Well, then I'm going to talk about this song that we've chosen because I think it was something I sent you that triggered this. First off, the song is from Pink Floyd, and it's off the Wish You Were Here album, and the song is Welcome to the Machine.
Yeah.
So this has several levels to it that I appreciate. Number one, sadly, the guy who was on the cover of Wish You Were Here, it's like a famous album cover, two kind of business types shaking hands. One of them's on fire. The stuntman who had been set on fire for that cover shoot just passed away. So I was like, we got to use this. And I found something out about that photo shoot, which was that they did it like 13 or 14 times. And on the last one, the flames went into his face. And so he was like, that's it.
Okay.
But that album, one of my favorites of all time, has a song on it, Welcome to the Machine, which I thought was very apropos for the situation that we're dealing with this LSAT. There were unusual things that happened on this test that we will talk about in some detail. And it really struck me as very, machine-like. That song is about getting torn up by the record industry and just being used like a commodity. And I feel like there's some things going on with the LSAT right now where they're trying to deal with these battles and you're almost getting like affected by corporate decisions more so than like individual ones. So I thought it was a good song for this.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very fair analogy. I didn't know that about the stunt guy. I know the picture's pretty famous. 14 takes? Set on fire 14
just kept setting them on fire.
That's pretty amazing, though. It took him 14 times to be like, guys, we've got it, right? Like, enough. That one got my eyelashes. Please.
Apparently.
Oh, there you
he
go.
made a comment that was to the effect of, he's like, no matter who you are, when fire goes in your face, you will drop and roll. And I'm like, yeah, if a mosquito goes in my face, I do that.
Right.
So.
It's the Mike Tyson line about everybody's got a plan until...
Get punched in the nose.
There you go. Mouth, I think, but yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
It's one of those.
Yeah. All right. Well, there we go. We got drinks. We got a song. Let's get into it. Let's talk about the LSAT world a little bit. And let's get through this quickly because there's really only two categories of things that I think bear mentioning. The first are some upcoming tests. We are staring down the barrel of the end of the year. The September test, obviously, is what we're here to talk about. It just wrapped up. Those test dates ended on the 6th. There is still one more September test to come. It's the makeup test that'll happen next Tuesday, I believe. If you had any kind of issues, and we'll talk more about about this as we go, but you still could qualify for that. Submit your issues, request the makeup test. You can get it. Your score will come out the same time as always. The release date for the September test takers, everyone including the makeup test, that is going to be Wednesday, September 24th, 9 a.m. Eastern time is when you'll get your scores. And then the final two tests, mercifully, of 2025 are happening in October and November, the final run of this gauntlet. The October test is a bit interesting. The deadline for that has passed. You could register up to the end of really August for that. So that's done. The test dates for that are October 3rd and 4th, which are a Friday and a Saturday. Then you get kind of a weird break of a Sunday. And then the 6th and the 7th, a Monday and a Tuesday, are the final two test dates for that. The score release for that is also Wednesday, October 24th, again, 9 a.m. Eastern. And then finally, the year wraps up with the November exam. The registration for that test is still open. You can register for the November test up until September 25th. So if you are on the fence about November, you can still commit. The test dates for that go back to normal. It'll be, I think, Wednesday through Saturday. That's November 5th through the 8th. And the score release for that is a Wednesday, November 26th, again, 9 a.m., bright and early Eastern time. Really bright and early for us, Dave. 6 a.m. for us.
Yeah, and it's funny that October LSAT is very strange with the days. Yeah. And not a lot of people know this, John, but that'll actually be my last LSAT here with PowerScore.
Oh, we're going to talk about this, aren't we? I wondered if you were ever going to bring this up. I keep pretending it's not real.
Some people know this, but not many. I will be taking a fairly lengthy sabbatical after the October LSAT is done. So I need a little time off. John, you certainly can handle things at PowerScore, and I'm absolutely confident in your leadership going forward. But it's time for me to leave.
Yeah, Well, you'll be missed. Certainly not forgotten. And there's enough of you, I think, lingering, tucked away into corners and nooks and crannies and things that you're going to be very hard to forget.
Yeah, we'll see what happens in the future. But the kind of cool thing is to go through that LSAT, then do the recap, and then we will also have the opportunity to do a crystal ball before it. So let's talk a little bit about that, because we got webinars that are coming up in case you're taking any of these LSATs. There is a personal statement webinar that's coming up on September 17th. And then we just decided today that on September 23rd, we will do a crystal ball for the October LSAT. This will probably end up being a little bit different. We'll explain why throughout this podcast than the usual crystal ball. But we are going to sit down and talk a little bit about what they can do, what their options are. And of course, we'll still go through the discussions about like the typical types of questions that you see, the spread that they have, things to emphasize before you study, and so forth. So it'll still be high value. It'll just be a little different than the classic crystal ball. That's one of the reasons why you don't see it being for October and November.
Right.
With what LSAC is doing right now, we'll do this on a test-by-test basis, but that'll be the last crystal ball for me as well. Yeah. It'll be all yours, John.
Yeah. I was just thinking we probably could have picked Strange Days by the Doors as the song for this one. Now, have we used that one before? Feels like it would have been apropos at least a half dozen times at this point.
It feels like that would be have been a good choice. Anything by the Doors is a good choice in my opinion, and I know yours as well.
Cool. Anyway, sorry.
In any event, no worries. That October crystal ball probably will be posted by the time this podcast comes out, so you can sign up for that. Again, it is on Tuesday, September 23rd. There's also on September 30th a basic conditional reasoning webinar, and then on the 8th of October, an advanced conditional reasoning webinar. And then at the end of October, we're going to do the secrets of the law school admissions process, a webinar that I wrote a while back that is still perfectly applicable to the situation that we have these days. Yeah. So a pretty good mix of, admission stuff between personal statement and admission secrets, and then a crystal ball, and then some solid conditional reasoning discussions.
Yeah, a good stretch of things through the end of October there. So, now we begin, Dave.
Let's do it.
Let's get into September. And the first thing we always do with these tests is just try to give people a sense of the scope and the scale of the exam. So let's talk a little bit about the September test, just in terms of the test day stats, day by day. It started on Wednesday, the 3rd. You want to run us through the numbers a little bit?
Yeah, this was really kind of interesting because as a lot of LSATs, it built as the week went on, but it really jumped on the weekend a little bit more than it usually does. On Wednesday, you had almost 4,600 test takers. Not a huge number overall. That's towards the the smaller side. And it was very similar on Thursday. You had about 4,400 people. So those are relatively small test days. And then on Friday, you saw about 5,800 people, 5,815. So it jumped up by over 1,000. And then on Saturday, it really ballooned. And it was over 8,000 people taking it, which makes sense. It's a weekend day. Now, that's not the largest they've ever done by any stretch of the imagination, but it is getting up there. That's usually where you start to see the system strain a little bit, is once you cross the 8,000 barrier.
They've had days over 10,000, but I will tell you this, as somebody who was basically chained to a computer for all 4 days of this, I could feel it. I could feel it Saturday. I don't know if the system strained, but I can tell you I sure did. Saturday was markedly different in terms of the volume of messages. And of course, there was also kind of a cumulative effect to the first 3 days of the holdovers, rollovers, continued messaging and things. But just the volume of people that were contacting me on Saturday, it spiked dramatically.
Yeah, by the time you get done with this, John, and you add in the retests that are coming up, you'll have around 23,000 people who will have taken this LSAT. So not a small test, a healthy-sized exam, as they say.
Yeah, I think about 21,000 of them messaged me. So thanks, guys.
And the remainder messaged me, so I think we have it all covered.
Thank you guys for being so friendly.
In any event, that retake, I think, is Tuesday, September 16th, as you mentioned before, and then everybody gets their scores on Wednesday, September 24th.
That's right.
Retakers included. So, John, what about test proctoring issues, technical issues? What did you see out there in your 21,000 conversations?
Happily, I think the proctors, at least at this point, for the most part, seem to have a fairly decent handle on things. I didn't hear too many reports of proctors that were completely lost. And this, in hindsight, a little bit, if you were to take a bit of a retrospective, if you go back to the early days of this, some of the proctors really had no idea what the LSAT was. You'd hear people being like, well, just talk to your professor and tell them to, re-administer the exam or let them take it tomorrow or something. You'd hear those kind of things where they didn't really know the nature of the exam. Most of those kind of complaints are gone. The proctors are doing a pretty good job by and large, both remote, online, and in person at the centers. But there is a weird issue that continues not only to persist, but that seems to have actually gotten to be much more prevalent this time around. And it's almost hard to explain, Dave, especially having not experienced it personally, me or you, considering we're not allowed within 1,000 miles of this test ourselves. LSAT won't let us take it. But people continue to report this and continue in an increasing volume to report that in reading comp in particular, there seems to be a case where at times you cannot click on certain answer choices. I see this happening mostly in in-person testing at the computers that the centers provide, the Prometric centers provide. Where you go to click on, say, answer choice C, and you just can't click it. It won't let you. Or an answer in some cases will be distorted. The words will be squished or smooshed, or the lines won't break correctly and it'll be compressed. And of course, people call the proctors in to get them to look at it. The proctors can't figure it out. They have to reset the entire testing session. And when this happens, usually it will fix itself. It'll self-correct. But what tends to also happen is that the time doesn't reset or doesn't save, doesn't stop. And so people lose 2, 3, 4 minutes at a time when this issue occurs. So if you go to pick an answer choice that you can't select, or you go to read an answer choice that you can't read, and you have to call a proctor in, and you lose 3 minutes in a section, this is catastrophe, frankly, in the sense that you're supposed to get a test delivered in a certain way that they've overcharged you for in the first place. That's my opinion. What do you do? And the answer, of course, is you submit a complaint, and then you have the personal debate with yourself as to whether or not this was severe enough to a sufficient degree that you want to scrap the entire first attempt to replace it with a retake, as Dave just described, in a week and a half or so, which you can ultimately qualify for if this happened to you. But no, if this did happen to you, you're not alone. In fact, you're in a growing minority. And this is a real issue. And Dave, I think you and I probably need to bring this up with LSAC directly, because when it's happened in August, it was the first time I'd heard of it, and it was a fringe event. And I thought to myself, well, that's weird, but okay, they'll sort this out. The fact that I heard it much, much more often this time tells me not only did it not go away or get sorted out, it seems to be kind of like Welcome to the machine. It seems to be spreading. I
You had this a
don't
lot
love
more than
this,
I
man.
did.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was on Reddit a lot. I think you were on Twitter and email and stuff a lot. But the Reddit people, there were several threads on Reddit devoted specifically to this issue. And again, it's just cataloged and historical. The receipts are there. You don't have to take my word for it. It's public knowledge.
No. I think you and I had different testing experiences this time, which is not normally the case. You had a lot more student discussions. I had a lot more, LSAC type discussions.
Yeah. You were in the machine.
Different machines,
Right.
different facets of the machine. So I did not have as many student conversations as I usually do. I still had a bunch, but not at the same kind of constant volume. There was a lot more of interruptions with the cheating situation, which will come up here in just a few minutes.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'll address it then.
Yeah.
There was, by the way, one other issue that I saw. I had a student who messaged me about a typo, and I saw that it was posted online as well, and a bunch of people chimed in. And apparently there was 2 words, and a space was removed from it.
I saw that.
And so the word only then was appended to this kind of original term, like X only. And a lot of people found that confusing. And I'm like, look, this test is hard enough. Let's not like exacerbate the situation by not having things delivered perfectly, or as you say, the inability to actually choose an answer choice.
Which is, I mean, that's the end result of, like, that's the worst case scenario is, all right, I struggled to read this, but I could parse it, not be able to pick an answer choice, especially the answer that you want to pick. I mean, that's the worst possible thing. Yeah, it's fun. I mean, you really, I was in Oz, you were behind the curtain, which I think is kind of a fair way to put it.
That may very well be. That's well done.
Thanks.
Anyway,
if this is the case, if this happened to you, I know it is the case, but if this is your case, then don't be shy about submitting a report and following up, being a polite pest, because they do ultimately owe it to you to grant you a retake if this happened to you. This is not the way that the test is supposed to occur.
That's exactly right. Anyway, let's move on. Let's get to the actual test content. One of the things that I often do is talk about a lot of disclaimers. I'm not going to do that. I'm tired of it. If you want to hear all the disclaimers, go listen to one of the earlier podcast recaps we've done, say for August or June or what have you. So the only thing I'm really going to say this time is, hey, we ask that you not summarize this online. Summaries miss the nuance. We'd rather people hear just what we say directly. It's free. We're going to try to make this really easy. We're actually going to try to go through it fast. So that's the disclaimer in its entirety. I'm not even going to repeat it twice, which I almost always do with that one. There's like 8 or 9 of them. I'm just not going to read them. Let us instead, John, get to the domestic September 2025 LSAT. And there's a lot of things floating around, but one of the first things that we often talk about is, all right, we do a crystal ball for these tests. In this case, we did a crystal mini ball for September.
Yep.
How did we do? What's your assessment?
Oh, boy. This was such an extremely unique test. I mean, we're obviously going to get into the nitty gritty about the details of it, the weeds, shortly. But I think any analysis of the crystal ball and the mini ball in particular, and this test and our predictions requires a little bit of context. We're going to talk about this a lot, but the main tests that we're going to get into, they didn't reuse any content. And that to me, as far as I know and can tell, is a first for this digital era since 2020. So nothing about the main tests that were administered in the past week could possibly have been predicted. We only try to predict reuses. We've never tried to predict brand new tests. You can't do it. It's never been seen before. How can you predict novelty?
It's never been used as a scored section before.
Exactly.
Typically.
Yeah, it comes from experimentals, but it's never been used as scored. We only predict scored reuses. However, as we're going to start with here in just a second, certain accommodated test types, most notably, I think, paper test takers, people who take it as a physical test as opposed to on a computer, they did receive reused exams, and exams very plural, as you're about to see. And for these tests, our predictions happen to be, happily, spot on. In fact, the main test that we said would appear, which was October of 2023, that was the primary test that was reused for the paper test takers, for the accommodated test takers with that test type. And the 4 RC reading comp topics that they got, the 4 RC topics from October 23, they were all listed for people in the September mini ball, and they were listed as the first in their sections for those people. So these were standout topics. This was the standout test. So if you're focused on the reuses, which is what we focus on, when it came to reuses, this was 100% accurate. I'd say this makes us 39 of the last 41 LSATs, despite the fact that this test was so unique in that the main tests themselves included no reused content whatsoever. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's a half cheer.
Yeah.
Essentially, we got it right, but we got it right for a really small proportion of people. And the vast majority of people who were trying to help as many people as possible,
Right.
they could not have been helped because they were not given any reused material. And as you said, pretty much every LSAT reuses material in this vein that we try to mine for predictions. And I think had this been what I would call a normal administration, that is the exam that they would have used across the board.
It's very
in
clear.
fact, the fact that they sent that out to so many paper test takers, and paper test takers, their materials are sent earlier as opposed to just like the immediate delivery that you get in a center or online. That tells me that that's the test they were going to use. We were going to be right for the vast majority of people. So then the real question is well, why didn't they use it more widely? And that's where it requires a little bit of explanation.
Yeah.
Perhaps you're aware of the fact that there is a burgeoning situation in China with cheating on the LSAT. And this involves all sorts of different methods of cheating, sitting for other people to take the exam, proxy test taking where someone takes it remotely. And through proxy test taking, they are able to steal exams. And a number of exams have been stolen and they have been leaked, essentially. LSAC has been informed of this. I was one of the people who informed them that it was actually going on and let them know. And they responded to this. They said after the August LSAT that we're not going to give the test in mainland China once the October LSAT concludes, which is an international LSAT. So they recognized that this was an issue and said, we're going to handle this going forward. That doesn't solve the entire problem. Leak tests are an issue. Anybody who gets their hands on those, and there's hopefully not too many people who were able to use them when they were out there, they would have an advantage because when LSAC reuses material, some of it was in the leaked content. And so that immediately, I think, changed their approach. And it's going to change their approach in October, too. So this will come up again, something I'm sure we'll talk about in the October crystal ball, John.
Yeah.
Which was that, hey, to stop people from having the possibility of cheating, we can't reuse tests like we normally do. So for the vast majority of people, we're going to go ahead and simply use what we call new material, previously unscored material, because that stuff hasn't been stolen yet. There are some experimentals that were stolen, but none of this stuff was involved in that. And so what really happened was due to this situation, people in the US and Canada ended up taking different LSATs than they probably were, intended to have ultimately received. Why didn't they change the paper and pencil test takers? Because they sent those materials out well before they understood that this was the case. This is kind of like they couldn't get it changed over in September. They will get it changed over in October. Yeah. What is going to happen, John, and you and I have talked about this extensively, is that October is probably an administration that will feature all new material. Nothing will have been reused.
Both domestic and overseas, I think, yeah.
For everything. International paper and pencil, it'll all be something most likely that isn't used or hasn't been previously used. One of the questions that came up online, I posted about this on Reddit, was, does that change the scaling? No, those are still LSATs that have been vetted. They just haven't been stolen. So they're just regular LSATs. They're not trying to change the test. There's not anything weird about those particular exams that they're going to use or even the exams they use this weekend.
Right.
So that's not anything to really worry about. And ultimately, they can't continue to do this forever.
No.
They can't just use new material constantly. They can't make it fast enough. They don't have enough material to reuse. That's why we're able to predict this stuff in the first place. But ultimately, they're going to have to make changes to this. I don't know what changes they will make. That's a conversation for a different day, but we may see fewer LSATs in the future. We may see LSATs on more concentrated days, only 1 or 2 days. We may see the LSAT go away from remote test taking, which is probably the only way to stop the thievery issue that they're facing.
Yeah.
In a sense, John, it's almost like they want to run it back like it's 2016.
Yep.
2015, whatever the case is, where I could see something coming where everybody takes it on paper again. They all go to test centers and it's 6 times a year. Wouldn't surprise me.
Or maybe they do it in test centers on computers, but the again, the solution is a human, someone there to supervise, and the fact that like you cannot steal this if you're being actively monitored in person.
That is exactly right, which means that the old way of doing this, where everybody went to, like if you're in LA, they'd send 500 people to UCLA to sit in a giant lecture hall and take the LSAT, and they'd hand out paper copies.
So I took it.
That was hard to steal.
So you took
it. Guess what? Online testing, not so hard to steal. So it could very well be that we return to the so-called old days of this. Yeah. Regardless, what happened is about after the first day, John, you and I had seen that it was basically material that was not being reused. I actually posted on Reddit and I was like, I think we're going to see a test administration that's all new. And that's actually where we discovered that the paper and pencil test takers didn't fit that profile, which it infuriated me, number one.
It coincided almost exactly with your post. I mean, within like
within an hour
or so. It
pissed me off.
Yeah. It felt almost like a booby trap or something, like a prank.
There were conversations had about that, but I honestly feel that in the main that was right. Most people who took it in the US and Canada, they did not see reused content. Like the number of paper and pencil test takers is really, really small. Yeah. You're not even talking like 300 or 400 of them. There's fewer than that. So by and large, the people who saw the new material were, your regular center test taker, your online test taker. But it was within about an hour of me posting that I discovered that, the paper and pencil people were like, no, they're giving us the content that's being reused, which was a test that was in the leaked tests, the stolen tests. Yeah. And I went ballistic. Yeah. I certainly yelled at LSAC about it. I was just like, test integrity's out the window. And, they have their excuse. And I've already explained, they're like, those tests had to be sent out beforehand. And we think the chances of any of those people being a cheater is really low. And I'm like, low is not the same as zero.
Right. There might be some people listening to this, just to interject quickly, that don't know what you're talking about in terms of your post.
Yeah.
So Dave, for some context here, Dave posted online that our expectation, our prediction really was that when you posted this, I think on midday Thursday?
Yeah, about 1:00.
Right. Midday Thursday, Dave posted that we expected that essentially, given what we had seen through Wednesday, the first day of testing, and most of Thursday morning, that we thought that everyone testing through the week was probably just going to get brand new content, no reused content. So our expectations, our predictions from the crystal ball and the mini ball that anticipated reused content were probably going to be misses, given that the test makers were trying to avoid
they wouldn't apply.
Yeah, we're trying to avoid reusing any content that might be out in the wild that people could have seen before, given that that stuff had been stolen. And of course, go ahead.
And I was complimentary of that. I was like, that is actually, if you think there's a serious cheating scandal, that is the right thing to do.
You were.
It's irritating for everybody who's like used to finding out what some of the topics are going to be, but this is the right thing to do.
You
and then,
advocated
of course, it
that
turned
approach, which you were a little more of an advocate than I was. I was annoyed by it because I was like, but I want to be right. you fell to, I think, the more justifiable side of like, but it's probably better to prevent the cheating. But I wanted to be right. Within an hour
anti-cheating.
Within an hour or so of Dave posting this, we started to get trickling reports of people saying, wait, no, I got exactly what you guys predicted, which of course began to throw some wrenches into the gearworks here, because we realized that certain people with the accommodated paper test that Dave just mentioned, who had been sent tests before they had to adjust course, LSAC, had to adjust course to adjust for the cheating and change track. They had, of course, planned to go down the path that we had predicted and would have followed. This felt like, Dave, we were pitching a no-heater and they pulled us in the first inning. That's what this kind of felt like to me. Is we were right.
It's better than, but the ninth inning with 2 outs.
Well, yeah. I mean, we didn't get that far down. Our predictions were right, but they, of course, they had to make a very dramatic pivot, because they realized that if they had continued to do what we had predicted, they would have also played right into the hands of the people who were nefariously undermining the system of test integrity.
A lot of people could have had an advantage that they did not deserve to have.
So, yeah, it made your post, unfortunately, slightly less than accurate, despite the fact that I do think the intentions of your post were both admirable and by and large correct.
Yeah, I was 99.5% right.
I think
but I'm not interested in 99.5. I'm interested in 100. So, I was peeved too. And I updated the post too to be like, well, guess what? This is what's happening. And then I just, really like went off on them about test integrity, which was funny because a bunch of people that I know in the LSAT field, and I'm fortunate to be friends with people who run other companies and on really good terms with them. They're like, tell me how you really feel.
Right. I knew your phone was going to blow up as soon as you put that edit in there. I was like, oh.
It was hilarious. At least it made me laugh, and I had some good conversations with those folks. But, quite honestly, LSAC's position here is one in which their comment is we had to move heaven and earth. That's an actual quote.
Really?
To get the test that we were originally going to use, which I'm pretty sure was October 23, out of the system and get a new one. And by and large, we eliminated the ability, for people to cheat. So credit where credit is due. For those of you who are following this issue along, it's going to have long-term implications. It's certainly going to affect the October LSAT. And I would say, in the meantime, keep your eye on Mike Spivey's podcast channel, the Spivey Consulting Status Check podcast. On Friday, while you were talking to students, I sat down with Mike as well as Travis, who is the original person who leaked. He let us know. He's the whistleblower essentially in this thing. He's like, people are cheating and I can see that they are. And he let us know, and he actually had forwarded information to me that proved to me that cheating was going on and that LSATs had been stolen. I was like, these are real. This is a real LSAT that I'm looking at. And he forwarded that to LSAC. I forwarded it to LSAC as well. We actually sat down and did a podcast with him, and he talked a little bit about how he figured it out, where it went, and we talked a little bit about the implications. I think that'll come out in a week or so, but definitely listen to that if you're interested in this. And if you're done with the LSAT, be like, who cares? I don't have to. September was my last ever. You've avoided, at least a change in the trajectory of this exam, because some things are about to change with it. We'll just have to see what happens exactly.
And we'll talk a lot more about that in the October crystal ball that we're going to do at the end of this month.
Let's continue on then.
All right. So given that the paper test people, the accommodated test people, got a very different set of content than the main test people, let's do this in two sections. And I want to move through the paper test people. Obviously, no slighter offense to them. They're just a very, very small cohort given the breakdown. Let's move through the paper test stuff very quickly if we can. And then we'll get to the main test stuff, which I know the vast majority of listeners would be a part of in just a bit. Fair?
Yeah. And I'll make one comment.
Please.
We know the paper and pencil test takers had this, but we've had reports that some people outside the paper and pencil group had this.
Yeah,
LSAC tells me that that's not the case. We just agreed to disagree on this as the way it goes. But John, why don't you run down all the content super fast, and then I will do the matrix even faster.
Okay. Oh boy, you really got yourself off the hook with this, didn't you? All right. Well done. Well done. All right. So here's what the paper people that we heard from, and there's a lot of this, surprisingly. I don't know why they chose to include so much for these folks. There's a small group. Here's what they got this week, and I am going to move through this quickly. If you took the paper test and you don't hear any of the stuff you got, please reach out and message us. We just simply didn't hear from you. We don't have it on our list. But again, if you took the main test, you're probably not going to hear your stuff in here, and that's okay. Yours is coming. Sit tight or skip ahead. So for reading comprehension, we heard 2 real sections of reading comprehension scored sections total for the paper testers, the accommodated testers. One section is from the main test, the number 1 test that we predicted in the crystal ball, the mini ball for the September exam. It's from October of 2023, 27 questions. We predicted all 4 of these topics in that particular mini ball session. This is podcast episode 141. If you want to go back and listen to it, it's all there. Here are the 4 passage topics. 1 was the rights of natural things. This had to do with rivers and forests. There was a passage on the sentimentality in literature. It had to do with highbrow and lowbrow works. Passage on medical simulations used to train healthcare professionals, comparing those to the use of real patients. And then water on the moon. There was a specific mission to the moon trying to find water. That was the comparative passage. I believe it was the 4th. That was 1 real section of reading comp. The other real section of reading comp that we saw paper people get were these 27 questions. This is from a test that has been reused, my goodness, countless times. Well, not countless, but several. It was February 2018 was the original. It's been reused in June 21, October 22, September 23. If you want to listen to the September 23 recap, this was podcast episode 139. You can go check it out. Here were the 4 topics. There was one on Elaine Locke, had to do with the Harlem Renaissance, a leader in that, African-American adult education, a passage on beetle larvae protected from ants and cottonwood trees. There was a passage on Cecilia Bach and her theory on lying and democracy. And then finally, I believe it concluded with a passage on arguments for and against the lengthening of copyright laws on books in Parliament, British Parliament. And that was your comparative passage there. Usually, when we talk about reading comprehension, we get also into the experimental topics in reading comp. We're going to do that. But the experimental reading comp that we saw for paper testers were also used the experimental topics for people in the main tests. So I'm just going to hold off here. We're going to talk about the experimental topics. We're just going to save them for the main test discussion that's coming in just a bit. Those, however, were the main real reading comprehension topics. Again, water on the moon in one, and then beetle larva in the other. If you had either of those as a paper tester, those were your scored reading comps. Let's talk about logical reasoning. Paper testers had 4 real logical reasoning sections. I'll say that again with a groan. There were 4 real logical reasoning sections that were used for paper test takers this week. I think that's overkill. I hate that they did it, but they did. Here we go. Very quickly, here's what we got. The one that I saw most in use for people, again, came from the main test that we predicted. This was October 2023. This was the first time that we've seen it reused. It had 25 questions. The most talked about included these. Koalas hugging trees, trying to stay cool. There was one about blood donations in Great Britain from 1980 to 1996. No idea what was going on there, but there you go. Corporations wanting to fertilize the ocean. Some sort of, I don't know, Nick Cannon situation. Insect repellent ingredients. School dress codes had to do with uniforms being mandated in schools. Ocean mammal size versus land mammals. How things grow larger, I believe, in the oceans. Makes sense. And then tea versus coffee and the health effects there. If anyone got my Nick Cannon joke, congratulations.
Oh, I got it.
Thanks,
It was
Dave.
excellent.
All right.
That was smooth.
Thanks. Yeah. I saw it.
Like
I was
Nick
watching
Cannon.
VMAs in a bar last night and Mariah Carey came on with a guy with a mask on. I was like, please tell me that's not Nick Cannon. It wasn't. Another real scored logical reason for the paper testers came from another test that we've seen many times before. We didn't predict this one exactly, although we did kind of give the source test. This came originally from January of 2022. It was repeated again in August of 2023. I'm going to pause here to really make a point. There is a section of logical reasoning from August 2023 that's coming. I'm not going to make a Nick Cannon joke there. But August 2023 has a logical reasoning section that is going to come up again. This wasn't quite the one that we predicted, although we did predict that August 23 would be used. Here were the topics, though. If you took a paper test and had this, these were real. The first question in this section was about driver's licenses. More questions in this section included midwives versus physicians attending the birth of a child at a hospital. There was one about false IDs, documents. Some are forgeries, most are official. This was about being used by government officials. A Mozart play, Don Giovanni specifically. Wolves and their pups moving, relocating dens within a 10-kilometer radius. And then finally, vitamin C and the effects that it has on improving health. Again, if any of those ring a bell, that section for you as a paper tester was scored. We're halfway through it. 2 more scored logical reasoning sections for paper people. Another one has been reused. This was the most reused of all of them over the years. This one comes from February of 2018. 25 questions, I believe. We've seen this one June 21, October of 22, September of 23. So another one from September of 23. You can find this back in podcast episode 139. Here are some topics from this real logical reasoning section for paper test takers. Increased drug testing among bike racing and racers in Europe. Ankle injuries from a specific brand of shoe, XZ shoes. Foreshocks in earthquakes. Baby talks, or baby talk, how babies communicate with parents and how parents talk back to infants. Nuclear submarines being used for power. to power military bases. Specifically, probably my favorite topic in this section, rabies, an outbreak of rabies, and how that contributed to the increase of vampire stories, I think in Middle Eastern Europe. And then finally, as we see, vitamin B6 in elderly populations. So another vitamin question, but this is different. Vitamin C in the last section, vitamin B6 here. And we're almost done, I promise, and Dave's going to come in with the matrix. There's one more section of real logical reasoning for paper testers. The final real logical reasoning section that we saw, and Dave caught this one at the 11th hour, really. Kudos to Dave. 26 questions in this one. This was February 2017 that we saw repeated in August 2020, many reuses as well. Here are some topics of this. Again, if any of these ring a bell, this section was scored for you. Stolen, unlocked cars, car robberies, middle-aged coffee drinkers, a lot of coffee on this test, as you'll see. Sunlight versus artificial light for seasonal depression, SAD, sad. Politician, a skilled writer makes a speech. Small Earth, a orbiting foreign planet that can't sustain life. It has to do with plate tectonics. That gold is your best long-term investment. Could be true. And then a study on crows. Could be ravens, but I think it was probably crows. And then cleverly putting pebbles into tubes to raise water level, I think, and get worms out. Fishing for food, basically. Again, if any of those, hopefully a couple of those topics ring a bell, and any of those sections, that section was scored for you, it will count. And you can use that to better self-assess and estimate your ultimate score.
Yeah, and like we said before, the vast majority of people who got those sections should have been paper and pencil test takers. If you did get that and you were not a paper and pencil test taker, the matrix will still apply to you. You can still use that.
Yeah.
And if you have any other sections that come from the group that we talk about next, shouldn't be the case, but could be the case.
Yeah.
You can just kind of put that together. But when we get to the scoring matrix, this is what we're doing with this. We're trying to predict.
Yeah. I'm going to interrupt you really quickly. I know you're about to do the matrix. I'm going to say one last thing that I meant to say before, and it's this, is that there were some mixes and matches between paper people and the content that we're going to talk about with the main administrations. So, for instance, some of the paper folks had like the reading comp with rights of natural things, the rivers and forests, water on the moon, but then logical reasoning that was used for the main administration that I haven't talked about, or we haven't talked about yet. Some paper people got reading comp that we haven't covered yet, but they'll recognize some of the logical reasoning that I just mentioned. I know if you're listening to this, and Dave, I'm actually going to include you because I know you're listening to this too. That's really annoying and really confusing. This was just the nature of the September test. I'm sorry. I want it to be clear. It's not up to me.
All right. Well, that being what it is.
All right. Now go.
Looking at the matrix here, what we are attempting to do, it's a scoring matrix. We're trying to figure out how many questions you can miss to get a 170. This kind of gives you relative test difficulty. So to start that off, we always say you can miss 7 questions as a baseline, and then depending upon what happens in each section, in RC or your 2 LRs, that could stay the same. It could loosen. It could even tighten, but it doesn't usually do that because 7 is pretty tight anyway. In this case, all those forms above, we've talked about them many times previously, and they actually all produce the same exact outcome. -8, meaning you can miss 8 questions, get a 170. Both those RC are considered on the harder side, so they loosen the scale from 7 to 8 no matter which one that you had. So if you had a lane lock, it goes from 7 to 8. If you had the one about the rights of natural things, it goes from 7 to 8. All 4 of those LR are considered to be fairly reasonable and in the middle. Just to say there aren't hard questions there, they're all zeroed out. So no matter if you had any combination of RC and 2LR from that grouping that John just went through, which is mostly paper and pencil people who had this, that is going to be -8 for you. If you had other stuff that we're about to talk in addition to some of this, then you can say RC gave me 1 more, LR didn't from this, and then we can kind of move on. So John, let's go to what we would call the main test takers. The majority test taking group, 20, almost over 22,000 people would have had the following content.
Yeah. If you just heard your RC, but not your logical reasoning, don't panic. Stick around. We're going to come to you right now. So far, though, your scale has been loosened by 1. Either of those reading comps would have just loosened you. Water on the moon, a lane lock, both of those loosened by 1. Let's talk about what the main digital folks would have just gotten this week. And let's start with reading comp. Dave, you can't be cruel enough to make me go through all of this too, right?
I mean, I was gonna.
Oh, you bastard. 1 foot out the door. All right. I'll do some reading comp, and then I'll let Dave jump in as he feels inclined. Let me start, though, with the first reading comp that we saw for the main test takers this week. And this is the one that we really woke up to Wednesday morning and began to see people kind of immediately reporting back to us about. And it started with a passage about Mayans. Goodness knows they love their Mayans these days. We've heard about Mayans a bunch. This specifically was about Mayans, Maya at Tikal. I think I'm saying that right. And earthworks in quotations. This were the ditches, the tunnels, the trenches, canals, dikes. I heard all of those words being used to describe the waterworks that they were using. And the question being, of course, were they used for water management or, as was originally presumed, to be for defense? The theory has shifted to water management away from defense. This was a tricky passage to start this section. This was a real reading comprehension section, I think, as most people at this point have figured out. But if this rings a bell, this section was scored for you. It went on to include passages on the investigation into the mysterious cause of about 100 dead elk that they found in New Mexico. The cause ultimately, and they investigated several from, I think, UFOs to like El Chupacabra and stuff. The cause was they drank from a trough of water infected with cyanobacteria. A passage that I would love, frankly, to read about Herodotus and his 9-book great work, The Histories, about the Greco-Persian War, wars 2,500 or so years ago. Fantastic. It deals with everything from Darius to, all of it. And then the specificity of copyright laws in general versus their applicability, specific applicability to music in this case. And that was the comparative passage, I believe, to round out the section. That, as we are going to say for every single thing that we talk about from here on out, was a new section. So no source that we can trace it back to previously scored. This was new. That was the other real reading comprehension section that we saw were these 27 questions, I believe. This was the less common of the two that we saw scored for the main test administration for people digitally testing. Included these 4 topics. 1, international environmental law development. There was one on voting systems that had to do with proportional electoral systems versus cumulative, kind of a winner-take-all system. There was one on literature and science, what they called a blank slate, literary theory and science. That was the comparative passage, blank brain, I saw some people saying. And then finally, one that I would actually like to read as well about AI, the idea of leveled logic from computer science, how it was applied to human minds. So again, if that rings a bell and you had 2 reading comps, that was your scored section among the 2.
Nice.
Yeah, thanks. If you did have 2 reading comps, I imagine of the 2 scored that we just talked about, they were paired with one of the following 2 experimentals. One of the experimentals that we saw for the main administration digitally included these 4 topics. Replicating psychological studies is hard. Researchers kind of disincentivized to replicate studies because, they said it limited their career advancement. There was a lot of confusion here. I got so many messages early on. We saw this on Wednesday, actually. This was paired a lot for people with the Mayan, Herodotus, the copyright laws of the music. It was paired a lot with that. The confusion being that there is a passage that we predicted in our crystal ball and our mini ball for September about the idea of replicating psychological studies. And so a lot of people were like, I know this passage is real or this section is real because you talked about or predicted this passage. Here's the thing about predictions. If we're going to predict a section, we're going to list 3, probably all 4 of the topics in that section. It's not just going to be one. So if one matches but the other 3 don't, you don't have a match, you have a coincidence. In fact, what you very likely have is an LSAT trap. They've done this intentionally. They've tried to fool you. They're slippery. They're sneaky bastards. They're doing this on purpose. And I think this was very intentional on their part. This was experimental. The passage that we predicted actually came from the January 2024 LSAT. I'm not going to list the other 3. I think that would actually be giving away a little too much here. But it was not used this week. We hoped it might be. It wasn't. But the January 2024 LSAT had a passage about the same topic or idea, but it was not included with the other 3 that I'm about to tell you. So replicating psychological studies is hard. That was one. The other 3 were these. Elizabeth Catlett, I believe her name was. She was an abstract expressionist artist. I think she was a sculptor. She gave a speech, and it talked about her influence or its influence on African-American artists. There was a passage on challenging the theory of animal size and the length of their maturity as it related to their longevity, their survival, how long they lived. And then the comparative passage in this section had to do with the natural human rights, extending to economic and social benefits. Liberties had to do with like rights versus duties in government and things. Again, if you can compare that or recognize those passages in one of your sections, and you're like, I had that and another reading comp section, and it had Mayans, or it had AI and computer science being applied to human minds, now you know which one was real. That set with Elizabeth Catlett and the human rights and the replicating psych studies, those were experimental. The other experimental reading comp that we saw a lot of, and there's 2 more coming, so buckle up, had to do with this. The reliability of eyewitness testimonies, specifically as it dealt with lineup identification. So eyewitnesses being brought in to kind of like pick people out of a lineup. What was weird, Dave, is I heard this primarily almost from everyone, but one person told me that their first passage, and this was passage 1, I believe, their first passage in this same section had to do with institutions and the restriction of ownership of research and researchers' information, how free staff are essentially to pursue their own research ventures. And I think I made a note to you, or a note somewhere, maybe to myself, which was, I wonder if they were, because it is experimental, they're free to do what they want, LSAT. I wonder if they were actually mixing and matching topics in and out, just to play with it. Why not? I mean, they can. Doesn't count.
It's not something they've really done before, but anything's possible in the new world.
Aren't we welcome to the machine, right? It is a new world, and this would be a time to do it. If they're going to play with things, here we are. Regardless, whatever you saw for your first passage in this section, the other 3 should at least match because there was no inconsistency here. Here were the other 3 experimental passages in this section. Developing nations and building a capitalistic economy, specifically this had to do with Hernando de Soto's theory about assets as capital. The comparative passage here had to do, I really would like to read this because I know a little bit about it, hysterical realism, specifically about modern novelists and how they don't develop their characters, or at least I imagine what this is about, was about how they write 900-page novels and just kind of play around and expand. I think it specifically mentioned like Thomas Pynchon, but my guess is it probably went into David Foster Wallace, or could have.
I think it's some Infinite Jest.
Yeah, I'm sure it was Infinite Jest, Satanic Verses. It would fit certainly neatly into this. Really anything he does. He's my favorite. And then finally, another passage I'd like to read, because I know a little bit about this too, was the Rising Star Cave and some early hominids, H. Naledi, and how large brains don't necessarily translate into what we had previously expected. This had to do with like burial practices, and they were occurring earlier and among hominid species that didn't necessarily have the brain capacity that we had thought. That's my interpretation anyway. So there you go. If any of those ring a bell, that whole section for you did not count, and you can forget all about it. There was one more. I promise we're at the end now. This is it. We're at the finish line.
We're at the end of RC.
Well, yeah. I meant we're at the end of me. Hint, hint.
You think?
Hope. All right. Last experimental RC had these 4, and it started, I believe, in this case with the comparative passage, although don't hold me to that. But the comparative passage in this section was about the preventative or the precautionary principle in establishing new environmental laws. I believe that might have had something to do with the U.S. and Canada, or it might have been India. Again, don't quote me too much on that. But the other ones I'm a little more confident about, one of which I'm very confident about, which was about Francis Bacon, and the author describing him as a romantic outlaw, which I kind of love. I've always wanted to be described as that. Francis beat me to it. Biorobotics was another passage in this section. Biorobotics versus computer modeling for biology research. And then finally, seemed kind of interesting, disability representation in the horror genre. I don't know if this was movies or if it was literature, but how disabilities are represented in that. So again, if even 1 or 2 of those sort of ring a distinct bell for you, you can chalk that entire section up as experimental. You know it's not scored. And you can look to your other reading comprehension and know that that's the one that's going to count to your final result. Whew.
And now you just have 4 LR to do.
Oh, tick.
You want me to do some?
No. How many do you want? You want to split it?
I'll do at least the first 2.
I miss your voice.
Oh, no, that's touch. All right. So after that lengthy explication of RC, let's dive into the LR. And of course, all this is essentially new material as well, meaning that they have not used it previously. It's not a reuse. It has been used as an experimental section, so yes. It's not as if this has never been tested or something weird's going on. Let's start off with the first of these 4 Saw this one out of the gate, 25 questions. Open up with a question about increasing safety at skate parks. Another one about Longtown residents rejecting a new plan to develop a mall because they fear it'll bring negative consequences. Yeah, these days it means it'll probably close soon. Another one about babies making a video of toy cars and the toy cars kind of disappearing by going through walls, the reactions there. Another one about Hamlet and Shakespeare. Were they inspired by the French writer Montaigne? Those essays are not. And then a study of long-term citizens in 10 regions with high radon and a high incidence of disease S. And then having an explicit system for measuring land is how this section closed out. And so there's a chronology of questions as you kind of went through that particular section. There's another question that people talked a lot about the mandible of an organism under a microscope shows 2. So it must be a flying insect, even though it had no wings.
Yeah.
That section was real. Okay. Here's another real section. Started off with a question about elephant ivory and the CITES Treaty, which is interesting because we just had a discussion about the CITES Treaty back in August in RC. And now you got another question about children playing, really pretending to be superheroes, pretty normal stuff. Newspaper creating the best headlines, yes, no headlines. Dog research. Dogs being excited when facing researchers. This towards the end of the section about teaching Mandarin to students, learning and speaking Mandarin. There's more foreign language students than ever, but fewer can speak or learn Mandarin.
Tough one.
I think probably LSAC is learning a lot of Mandarin these days. Most hairdressers at the metro station salon being licensed and skilled. Another about habitual coffee drinkers and car advertisements. And then closing that section out with a question about rabbits being poisoned at a state fair.
Yeah.
One of my friends just went to the Minnesota State Fair, which was running over the last couple weeks.
Well, there you go. Well, if they didn't take a rabbit.
I have not been in a long time, but I do know the score at halftime, so we all right.
Nice. You are still
We're
watching
not
the
dead
game.
yet.
All right. That's why you want me to keep reading these things.
I am. I'm checking the game out. It's been abysmal offense.
I will do you this courtesy because I love you
They're
very
at
much.
halftime, man. I'm all clear. I can talk all I
love you
want.
very much and have no stake in this game. Oh, they're at halftime? I should make you keep going, but I will finish this off.
An abysmal first half performance with only 80 yards total offense.
All right. Well, I'll do you this courtesy instead. You don't care about the score, but I'll let you drink. I will do the final 2 scored logical reasoning sections that we saw, unless you object.
No.
Can't imagine.
See if it comes back on while you're talking.
All right. Well, while Dave drinks and watches halftime results, here are the final 2 logical reasoning sections that we saw. These 2 seem to be slightly in less use. We saw these really kind of crop up Friday and Saturday for people. The first 2 that Dave just went through were certainly the ones that most people got. So again, if you've heard yours already, congratulations. However, if you haven't heard yours yet, specifically if you're a paper person and still haven't heard yours, here we go. Hopefully this checks your boxes. There was one that I'm about to cover. I'm not sure how many questions were in this. There was some debate about it, but it was, as with everything that we're still talking about, brand new. Some questions from this were small animals versus humans walking into, I believe, a Roman cave, and only humans walked out of the cave alive. I think this was a resolve the paradox question that had to do with there was a gas in the cave that only reached the height of the small animals, so it killed them, but the humans kind of unscathed. There was a question in this section about private sales of dinosaur fossils versus the private sales of art. Question about police station department and the headquarters in there and the efficiency and the funding and the budget. About the discipline and the courage in Olympians and athletes. And then a question I'd really like to read because I think it's interesting about people driving barefoot and how that was not a safe way to drive. That was a real scored section of logical reasoning. So again, those were all grouped together. If you had that section, it counted. And then finally, and I promise we have reached the end, blessedly, there's one last scored section of logical reasoning that we saw. And if by the end of this you still haven't heard yours, it's because we didn't hear from you. We've done our best, I promise. Here are the final topics that we heard. A logical reasoning section. I'm not sure about the number of questions. Brand new. It started with a question on the best orchestra in the country. Some more questions in here. One I heard a lot of people talking about the fancy and pretty donuts being advertised online. I think it went on to say something about the donuts tasted terrible, but they looked really good.
There was social influencers or something like that.
You know what's funny? You talked about malls before, and I almost chimed in. I just had lunch across the street at a mall, a place called Katsuya, and sat across from a social influencer, a girl named Sophie Mudd, who's she's cute, she's sweet. We talked for a second. There you go.
I don't know her.
Yeah, well, some people might. Another question in this section had to do with small side dishes and calorie consumption. I had to essentially the idea that it's a good idea for restaurants to offer small side dishes as an option for people trying to lose weight because they were lower calories. Dave, a question in this that you might be interested in. Conditions that might produce high quality wines that had to do with soil and barrels and stuff. This was not, by the way, a question about eating soil, which I find to be weird. That was a topic in an experimental section. If you had a question on eating soil, it was with townhouses and things. That was experimental. So you can ignore that. Question in the real section, as I'll keep going, had to do with bright versus beige interiors and houses, realtors trying to sell these houses and how they affect sale price. And then, quite finally, the validity of a Paleolithic diet.
It's valid.
And safe, Fendi.
There you go. All right, John, I'm not going to belabor the point further because, unfortunately, we had really no choice. It just takes a long time. Oddly enough, despite the fact that you'd think that they would use less material this time because we think that it gets stolen every single time that they use it now, they actually used quite a bit. And that was primarily what John just went through. All material that was being used for the first time had been tested as experimental, but it had not been stolen. And that was the key thing. They wanted to make sure that the vast majority of people saw material that had not been previously stolen or leaked in any particular way. Makes the matrix a little more challenging for us, but we do this every single time with new content as well. So every exam has new content. We're not scared of it. It doesn't make us feel like we can't figure it out. It just makes our life harder. It's a lot easier to come across a section that we've seen 5 times and be like, we know exactly what to do with this. So, one more time, the matrix. We are trying to predict the number of questions that you can miss to get a scaled score of 170. To start off with, we say that you can miss 7. And then as we go through each of the sections, you listen and you adjust your personal scale according to what you hear for each section. And there are actually a lot of different scores in here. So this is exactly why I said before, please don't summarize this. Let us have the nuance of this that's out there. If we're uncertain, we are always conservative. So let's start off with the 2 scored RC. The first one was about the Mayan earthworks and water, the 87th passage that they've done about that, the Dead L, Herodotus, and music copyrights. This is an interesting section because I think at the very top line, the 170s, we don't think it moves the scale, but as you go down scale, we think that it does move the scale. And so this is what we call the 0.5. If you are really at the very top of the LSAT, it's not giving you a big break to have run across this. However, if you're scoring in the 160s, 150s, there's some tough questions in here, some difficult points. It is going to move the scale for you. That's what 0.5 means. So you could adjust from 7 to 7.5 and then make a assessment based upon where you've been scoring in your practice tests. The other RC that's out there, and this is the easy part, the international environmental law, the voting systems, blank slate, literature theory, and AI and human minds, we think that that does not move the scale at all for anybody, that is a 0 implication there. All right, so everybody who is had those RCs would either hit 7 or 7.5. Let's go to the LR. John covered 4 of these, and they have 3 different scales for them, really about the most you'd ever see for something like this. The very first one was the skate park, Shakespeare, measuring land, flying insect mandibles. That we leave as a reasonable section and stays 0 in basically what we call the middle. The next one was a tough one. It was about children's superheroes, the dog research, and kind of like the excitement, the learning Mandarin, hairdressers, and poisoned rabbits. We think that moves the scale by 1. So that would take everybody from really like 7 to 7.5 to 8 or 8.5 if you have just these. And then the last 2 are both going to be 0.5. They're both going to be in the middle. The one is about animals and humans in the cave, police station funding, Olympians, and driving barefoot being a bad idea. That is a 0.5. So again, at the 170 level, it's not really helping you, but at the 155, 160 level, 165, it is helping you. And then last, the best orchestra, the pretty donuts that the influencers like but taste terrible, the side dishes, quality wines, beige interiors, and the paleo diet. That is also 0.5. And that leaves a lot of different possible outcomes depending upon the combination that you got. And if you got some of the stuff from before, the paper and pencil stuff that we've already talked about, you could mix and match that too, although that should be very rare, if anyone, that is out there. And that leaves the entire scaling matrix. There's a lot, John.
Yeah, it is. I want to put a caveat on this too, Dave. I've debated this caveat, but I feel like I have to say it now that I'm actually processing this all with the aftermath of what we just went through. They haven't released anything in over or almost 2 years. And what they've released has also not been terribly recent. I'd love to see them give one of these new tests with its scaling. Because what you and I are essentially doing now in terms of trying to estimate scaling is really based on what is growing more and more outdated. And I don't say that to try to undermine the accuracy, the validity, the credibility of what we're doing. I say that simply to emphasize the point of I want to see what LSAC is doing lately. And they're not giving us that chance. That sucks.
And they're not going to.
I know, but I can still scream into the voice because it feels good to scream.
Yeah, if you're going to get anything, you're going to get some of the tests that were stolen released.
Fine. Dude, fine. Give me October 23. They just gave it this week to the paper people. Give it to me.
Yeah, I think that's
Do
your
I have to
most
go to
likely
China
thing.
to get it? I've been wanting to go.
Well, there you go. Either way, I will say this. That's the most likely thing to ultimately happen is they stop using those tests that were stolen, which is the right thing to do, even though it's painful and expensive for them.
I
And then
just want
release
the
them.
scales, bro. I just want to know
Well-
how they're actually scoring these things so that we can confirm that our estimates of difficulty here, which I'm quite certain are accurate, I can be entirely certain are accurate.
Yeah, I think this is a matter. We have enough volume that we can make these estimates and feel great about them. But what we want is continuous confirmation.
Right.
You don't want to see that something's changed and you didn't know about it. We feel strongly that it hasn't. And certainly the scoring results that we see on the whole, I think, kind of confirm that for us. But without the release of tests every year, it's hard to know, all right, are things staying the same or not for sure? LSAC will tell you, yes, of course, this is a standardized test. It has standards. They remain the same. And I'm like, oh, yeah? Let's go back to PT1, which a lot of people listening to this now are like, what? There is a PT1? Yes, there is. It is the June 1991 LSAT. It is way, way old. They don't even release it anymore or allow people to use it. Let's check that and then check it, according to what is like PT 156 or something. They don't look quite the same. So
They'd have told you
yeah.
in August that reusing tests wasn't a problem. So let's take their word.
Yeah. And now I probably have to go watch this game, although I just saw something that happened that made me very sad.
Oh, I thought what I just said made you very sad.
No, football makes me sad. I'm a lifelong Vikings fan. There's never any satisfaction.
I love how laser focused you are on this conversation.
Either way, we'll find out how everybody did on Wednesday, September 24th at 9 a.m. Eastern. And if you think there's a chance you're going to take that October LSAT, I invite you to join John and myself the night before on Tuesday, September 23rd at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific for us. And I would think that the registration will be up by the time this podcast actually comes out.
Probably so.
Got more to talk about with this. And as I also said earlier, stay tuned for that SpyV podcast on China cheating that features me and our friend Travis, the guy who kind of like blew open all this China cheating and has changed the future. Credit to him.
Yes, sir.
Any final comment, John?
Oh, man, I think we have both said enough.
On that note, if you get a chance, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else that you may find it. If you've enjoyed it, leave us a comment or rating as well. And if you have any questions, or if you had content that you did not hear on the podcast today, send that information to us at lsatpodcast@powerscore.com. We will definitely add it to our records, and that will help future test takers. On behalf of John and myself, we hope this was helpful. We hope that you did great on this test, and that this helps sorts a little bit out for you as far as these things go. Stay safe out there, and we will talk to you soon.